Today I'm going to try to objectively analyze whether or not the majority of women who are getting abortions are guilty of the sin of murder. As I do this, I'm also going to try to objectively analyze whether pro-life laws that restrict abortion but don't necessarily abolish it still accomplish some good by saving some lives of preborn children. So that said, let's just start with some baseline data. So here I have the CDC surveillance report on abortions from 2022. We see that 0.2% of abortions in 2022 were by women who were less than 15 years old, 8.5% were by women who were 15 to 19, which means that 91% were from women who are age 20 or older. Okay, the next piece of information I want to look at from this report comes from table number 8. It is the number and percentage of reported abortions by known number of previous live births and reporting area of occurrence. Again, this is for 2022. Okay, so I'm going to go down to the national level. Okay, we've got number of previous live births. We're going to look at how many were 0. All right, so on average, 40.6% of the women who are getting the abortions in 2022, 40.6% of them have not given birth before, which means that 59% of them roughly have given birth at least once. Okay, and we see that it looks like about 35% have given birth at least twice. Okay, so when we're talking about the majority of women, they're going to be over age 20 and they're going to have given birth at least once before. Okay, not all of them, but the majority will have. Now, the reason I think that this is important to note is because the majority of women who are going to give birth in the United States will have seen at least one ultrasound. And then since they're giving birth, they're going to see the child that was the same child that was in the ultrasound. So presumably they're going to be connecting the dots that the child that they're now holding in their arms is the same child that existed in the womb that they saw on the ultrasound. So that's why I think it was important to note that. All right, next study that I want to take a look at comes from the Guttmacher Institute. So they did a survey of women who were abortion patients. I want to look specifically at table number 3. So let me go and find it right here. Okay, percentage distribution of women having an abortion by their most important reason for having the abortion, 2004 and 1987. So the sample size for their 2004 survey was 957. Sample size for 1987 was 1,773. Now keep in mind, this is by their most important reason for having the abortion. Okay, if we go up, there's a different table, table number 2, which lists the reason that contributed to their decision to have an abortion. Okay, but I want to focus on their most important reason for having the abortion. The reason I want to focus on that, by the way, is because a lot of times coercion gets mentioned in the context of whether women are culpable for the sin of murder in the abortion process. And when we look at their most important reason, if we look down here, husband or partner wants me to have an abortion and parents want me to have an abortion. In the 2004 survey, both of those were less than 0.5% of respondents, so that was their most important reason for having the abortion. Okay, now the most common reasons that women are going to be having these abortions are they're not ready for a child or another child, / timing is wrong. Okay, can't afford a baby now. That's 23% there. Have completed my childbearing or have other people depending on me. Children are grown. Don't want to be a single mother. I'm having relationship problems. Don't feel mature enough to raise another child, feel too young, would interfere with education or career plans, physical problem with health, possible problems affecting the health of fetus, was a victim of rape. Looks like in this case, they've got that as less than 0.5% as well. So we see that in the majority of instances here, by their most important reason, it actually has really nothing to do with someone else coercing them. Okay, really, pretty much, if we look at the top 3 here, not ready for another child, timing is wrong. We could probably classify that as convenience. Can't afford a baby now. None of us would say that that's a justifiable reason to kill a toddler. Okay, with all these, you can kind of trot out the toddler. If you're aware of that strategy, you basically just say, okay, well, would this reason qualify to murder a toddler? If not, then it doesn't qualify to murder a preborn child either. I have completed my childbearing / have other people depending on me. Children are grown. That would also be one out of convenience. All right, next thing that I want to look at is this tweet from Kristen Hawkins. Okay, so she says, Charlie Kirk is right. Most mothers never see their child on the ultrasound, yet are told the child inside of them is just a clump of cells. And nearly 70% of women say they were coerced to have an abortion. Why aren't we going after the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical and abortion industry that exploits and preys upon pregnant mothers? Okay, the thing I want to just focus in on here is the nearly 70% of women say they were coerced to have an abortion. Okay, this number, it gets spread around pro-life circles, in particular, I think on Twitter. And it's just, honestly, I'm not sure how else to say it, but it's just pretty obviously misleading at the very least, if not just flat out falsehood. And the reason I say that is because, so this guy in the tweets, he says, and nearly 7% of women say they were coerced to have an abortion. This statement is not remotely true. Kristen Hawkins links to the study. Okay, I go to the study, and the study itself says that the number is only 10%. Okay, watch this. I'll Command F 10%. Okay, let's see where it is right here. So the survey, for one thing, it only had 226 people complete it. So we're not dealing with a big sample size. This is a much smaller sample size than the one from Guttmacher Institute, both the one that was in 1987 and the one that was in 2004. And also it's smaller in sample size than another study we're going to mention in a little bit here. Okay, but it's only 226 people. And even of that 226, only 10% said that they were coerced. And keep in mind, this is self-reported, by the way. This isn't like, the actual someone has been convicted of actually coercing a woman to get an abortion, which, by the way, coercion is already illegal in all 50 US states. But yeah, even in this study, it's only 10% that is listed. And that's the one that Kristen Hawkins literally links. Now, I mention this because I did have a conversation recently with Charlie Kirk, sort of on this topic of whether women are victims. And I don't particularly actually blame him for thinking that there are many women who are being coerced. I don't think he used the term majority or anything like that, so I don't want to put words in his mouth. But if he thinks that many women are being coerced, I think part of the problem is a lot of pro-life leaders are basically, insinuating that many women are being coerced. The Kristen Hawkins tweet right here, and nearly 70% of women say they were coerced to have an abortion. That number is not remotely true. And so I don't necessarily even blame Charlie if he does think that a lot of women are being coerced, or maybe if he has a view that more women are being coerced than exists in reality, because a lot of pro-lifers, I think, are pushing that, even though this 70% number is obviously not true, even by the own study that Kristen Hawkins says supports it. So that being said, let's move on to the next thing I want to point out. Okay, so another study here. We have relationship between ultrasound viewing and proceeding to abortion. All right, so let's read through it. Data from medical records for 15,575 visits by women seeking abortion care at a large urban abortion provider in 2011 were analyzed for factors associated with choosing to continue the pregnancy. All patients received a pre-procedure ultrasound scan and were offered the opportunity to view the image. Results: patients opted to view the ultrasound image 42.5% of the time. Nearly all pregnancies, 98.8%, were terminated. 98.4% of pregnancies among women who viewed their ultrasound images, and 99% of pregnancies among the patients who did not. Among women with high decision certainty, viewing was not associated with deciding to continue the pregnancy. Viewing was significantly associated with deciding to continue the pregnancy only among the 7.4% of women who reported medium or low decision certainty about having an abortion. All right, so I think there's two big takeaways from this study. One is that if we just pass a law that says that all these women have to view abortions, it's not like the amount of abortions is suddenly just going to go plummeting down. No, there would probably be some impact, and it would probably save some lives, in particular among the women who are at a medium or low decision certainty. So if we had the opportunity to pass that law, would it do good? Yes. Would it solve all of our problems, and would women suddenly all be choosing to choose life? Absolutely not. Okay, this data tells us that 93% roughly of women are at a high decision certainty, and even if they view an ultrasound, it's not going to have a statistically significant impact on whether or not they choose life or continue with the abortion. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to repeat the stat here. All right, patients opted to view the ultrasound image 42.5% of the time. Nearly all pregnancies, 98.8%, were terminated. Okay, so for many of these women, the majority of these women, in fact, even viewing the ultrasound of their child is not going to change their mind because they're already at that high decision certainty. Before I dive into the next study, I want to make a quick note on informed consent. This idea that women are victims of the abortion industry and don't know what they are doing because they're not given informed consent doesn't really make sense to me, because ultimately the whole point of the abortion, the reason that the women are getting it in the first place, is because they are already informed of the fact that it results in the death of their child. That's the whole point that they're getting the abortion. And so if someone wants to make the argument that women are victims of the abortion industry in the sense that they think the women aren't being informed of the mental and physical health risks to themselves of the abortion procedure, and if they can support that with evidence, that's fine. As long as they can support that claim with evidence, I don't have a problem with them making that claim. But my problem is when they say that the woman is not guilty of the sin of murder and that she's a victim in all of this, and that she's not guilty of the sin of murder because she didn't have informed consent. But she was very well informed that the abortion procedure would result in the death of her child. That's the whole reason that she was doing it, excluding the rare instances of genuine coercion from like a violent boyfriend who's forcing her to do it against her will. Excluding those rare instances, she's 100% informed of the fact that she's killing her child. That's the whole reason that she's doing it. And so I'll just repeat once again, if someone wants to say that these women aren't being given informed consent in the context of them not knowing the mental and physical health risks of the abortion procedure, and someone can support that with evidence, I don't have a problem with someone making that claim. But my issue is when someone says that these women aren't being given informed consent and therefore aren't guilty of the sin of murder. These women are very well informed of the fact that when they go to the abortionist and pay them to execute their child, that they are in fact causing the death of their child, or when they take mifepristone and misoprostol, which are responsible for 63% of abortions in 2023, according to Guttmacher Institute. When they do that, they're doing it because they are informed of the fact that it results in the death of their child. And so that was just a quick note on informed consent. But that said, let's go ahead and dive into the next study. So this one's titled Evaluating the Impact of a Mandatory Pre-Abortion Ultrasound Viewing Law, a Mixed Method Study. So with that said, I've got highlighted the parts that I want to go over. It is going to take a while, so do bear with me. But I think this study is very important, not only because it really gives us a lot of information about what's going on in the abortion process, who's the dominant decision maker, how much they are informed, in particular in this case in the state of Wisconsin, which has different laws than other states, of course. I'll also point out, just for absolute objectivity, Wisconsin is currently ranked as a hostile state to abortion's rights. Okay, so this is not like a super friendly state like New York or California. It's currently ranked as hostile. So just want to make sure that you guys understand I'm trying to approach this as objectively as possible. So one other thing that should be noted is you can't take the informed consent laws that are required in Wisconsin, the mandatory ultrasounds that are being placed in the line of sight, the 24-hour waiting period, and extrapolate that to all the abortions nationally, because obviously these are laws that are specific to the state of Wisconsin. Okay, so don't try to take this and then extrapolate that and say, okay, a woman who's getting an abortion in New York or California is seeing all this information. Of course she's not, because Wisconsin has more pro-life laws. Wisconsin is actually hostile to abortion rights, and that's a good thing, as we'll see in this study. And I'll also point out, Wisconsin ranks as one of the states with lower abortion rates per 1,000 women who are between like a certain age range, if you look it up. But basically, if you look at the abortion rates, Wisconsin is on the lower end, which is a good thing. And again, that's probably in part because they're hostile to abortion rights. Although I will point out, there is kind of a question of if it's a chicken or the egg, which came first here. Is it that Wisconsin already has a pro-life culture, thus they're able to pass these pro-life laws? Or is it that by passing the pro-life laws, the abortion rates are actually going down? So that is one thing that I have trouble pinpointing is, what's coming first here? Is it the pro-life culture comes first and thus we're able to get the laws? Or do the pro-life laws reinforce pro-life culture that was already there, right? That's kind of something that's a little bit difficult to examine. But anyways, I'm not going to talk anymore. Let's get into the study, see what it says. So since mid-2013, Wisconsin abortion providers have been legally required to display and describe pre-abortion ultrasound images. We aim to understand the impact of this law. We used a mixed method study designed at an abortion facility in Wisconsin. We abstracted data from medical charts 1 year before the law to 1 year after and used multivariable models, mediation, moderation, analysis, and interrupted time series to assess the impact of the law, viewing and decision certainty on likelihood of continuing the pregnancy. We conducted in-depth interviews with women in the post-law period about their ultrasound experience and analyzed them using elaborative and modified grounded theory. Results, a total of 5,342 charts were abstracted. 8.7% continued their pregnancies pre-law and 11.2% post-law. P equals 0.002, which is statistically significant. A multivariable model confirmed the law was associated with higher odds of continuing pregnancy, adjusted odds ratio of 1.23. Decision certainty, adjusted odds ratio of 6.39, and having to pay fully out of pocket, adjusted odds ratio of 4.98, were most strongly associated with continuing pregnancy. Ultrasound viewing fully mediated the relationship between the law and continuing pregnancy. I'm going to jump down to my next highlighted portion here. 19 of 23 women interviewed viewed their ultrasound image. Most reported no impact on their abortion decision. 5 reported a temporary emotional impact or increased certainty about choosing abortion. So not choosing life there, choosing abortion. 2 women, and keep in mind this is out of 23, reported that viewing helped them decide to continue the pregnancy. And then both also described pre-existing decision certainty. Ultimately, what we're seeing there, okay, is that only 2 out of 23 women reported viewing helped them decide to continue the pregnancy. So again, that would be the minority of women who are viewing this, and it helps them to continue the pregnancy. I'm not saying that's insignificant, because of course it's significant to the child whose life still exists today because their mother didn't choose to have them executed in the abortion process. So it's certainly significant to those children, but it is not the majority of women. And keep in mind, the 2 questions I set out to answer at the beginning of this, one of them was about the majority of women and whether they are morally culpable for the sin of murder in the abortion process. And the second one is whether pro-life laws are helpful, even though they fall short of equal protection. So far, we're seeing that the majority of women are morally culpable for the sin of murder, and also that pro-life laws do some good and are helpful, even though they fall short of equal protection. And so we should try to gain as much ground as we can, as often as we can, and as quickly as we can, while taking the political realities into account. So conclusions: this law caused an increase in viewing rates, viewing rates being of the ultrasounds, and a statistically significant but small increase in continuing pregnancy rates. However, the majority of women were certain of their abortion decision, and the law did not change their decision. All right, now let's go through just a quick section on the introduction. In July 2013, Wisconsin law took effect mandating that abortion providers display and describe the ultrasound image to patients prior to offering an abortion. While 10 states have laws requiring abortion providers to offer women the opportunity to view their ultrasound images, Wisconsin's law goes a step further by requiring them to present the image in the patient's line of sight, whether or not the woman wishes to see it. If a woman does not want to view, she may physically turn her head away or close her eyes. The technician is required to give the woman a verbal description of the ultrasound image, including identification of fetal parts, the heartbeat, and current development of the fetus. Okay, just a quick pause here. That's pretty informed consent. And another thing here, if a woman was to get an abortion, like prior to week 1, and there's not, a bunch of fetal parts that can be described, there's not a heartbeat yet, and the child's not very developed at that point, Charlie would still say that that child is equally human and equally a person as a child who's at 10 weeks development and has all these features that can be described on an ultrasound. The law further requires abortion providers to offer patients a printed version of their ultrasound image and a state-produced booklet describing fetal development throughout pregnancy. Additionally, a woman must receive in-person state-directed information before starting a 24-hour waiting period and subsequently making a second trip to the clinic before she can have an abortion. All right, now let's move down. Okay, so that just gives you some context about what went into effect when Act 37 passed in 2013 in Wisconsin. Okay, so that's pretty informed, I would say. And keep in mind that's in addition to pro-life laws that were already on the books, mandating things like a 24-hour waiting period and informed consent, which included information about alternative options, by the way. I did read through the current laws that are in Wisconsin. You can read through them as well, but it's really long, so I figured I probably wouldn't do it in the context of this, because if I did that, it'd make the video way longer than it's already going to be. So, results. While the law required providers to display the ultrasound image, women were legally permitted to physically turn their heads away or close their eyes. Women in the post-law period were more likely to view the ultrasound image than women in the pre-law period, although more than half of patients did choose to view pre-law, 61.3%, versus 90.9% post-law, so humongous improvement by about 30%. Compared to the pre-law period, significantly fewer women qualified for assistance from an abortion fund in the post-law period, 46.6% pre-law versus 40% post-law. Among those eligible for an abortion at the study site, women in the post-law period were more likely to continue with their pregnancy than women in the pre-law period. So 8.7% pre-law versus 11.2% post-law. So we see a 2.5% improvement in women choosing life, or at least I should actually rephrase that. We see a 2.5% improvement in women continuing their pregnancy. So with this study, they can't actually tell if the women proceeded all the way to birth. All that they can tell is if the woman didn't get an abortion at that same clinic. So that they can't tell if the woman carried to term, but basically you can say that she continued the pregnancy because she didn't get an abortion at the clinic. All right, so we see a 2.5% improvement in women continuing the pregnancy, but we have to keep in mind that there was an almost 30% increase in women viewing the ultrasounds. So let's go back to the 2 questions that we want to answer here. Question number 1, are the majority of women morally guilty of the sin of murder in the abortion process? Well, so far it's looking like they aren't coerced. In the majority of cases, they aren't coerced. And in this case, in Wisconsin, at the specific Milwaukee clinic, they're being given an abundance of information about the life of their child, and 89% of them are still choosing to go through with the murder of the child. Okay, now the second question is, do pro-life laws that restrict abortion but don't abolish it accomplish some good? And the answer from this study so far, absolutely. We see a almost 30% increase in the amount of women who are viewing their ultrasounds, and we see that leading ultimately to 2.5% more women choosing to continue their pregnancy. Okay, so far, those are the answers that we're seeing for those 2 questions. All right, viewing the ultrasound image, segmented regression analysis of the monthly aggregate data found a significant difference in viewing levels pre-versus post-law, KP less than 0.001, so obviously very statistically significant, extremely statistically significant. All right, now we've got this table here. A few things I want to go over in the table. So this is table 1 of the study for anyone who has that study up. Okay, characteristics of the pre- and post-law populations at a Wisconsin clinic. All right, so one thing to note, sample sizes, pre-law 2,724, post-law 2,618, significantly greater sample sizes than in that study that was referenced by Kristen Hawkins, which only had 226. This is also a bigger sample size than existed in both of the Guttmacher Institute surveys. And this is a smaller sample size than the study I mentioned earlier that looked at the women who had viewed ultrasounds at high, medium, low decision certainties. Okay, so this is still a pretty good sample size, certainly above 2,000. All right, so funding. Okay, we see that pre and post-law, pre-law, 53% of women had to pay out of pocket, post-law, 60%. The reason I wanted to highlight this here is because it is true that you can have people getting outside funds for abortion. And obviously that's bad, right? If we can cut down on that, that's good, because when people pay out of pocket, they're actually more likely to choose life, is what the data tells us. So if we can cut down on people who are funding abortions, like these, whether they're, I don't know if nonprofits can, but whatever entities are funding them, if we can cut down on that, that's a good thing. Okay, that could ultimately help to save more babies. So that's good. Now, we should still note that when it says required to pay fully out of pocket, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the mother. Okay, I want to be as objective as I can here. It doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be the mother who's funding it. Sometimes it can be a boyfriend. Okay, when it says required to pay fully out of pocket, that doesn't automatically mean mother. You could have instances where boyfriends are paying for it, parents are paying for it, friends are paying for it. Those instances can occur. But it should also be noted that if I was the mother of a 3-year-old child and I, for some reason, horrifically, wanted to have that child executed, but I had to, raise money to do it because I had to pay someone to take them to a death camp or something, and someone else funded it, well, that wouldn't make me as the mother any less complicit in ordering the execution of the child just because I didn't pay for it directly. I still ordered it. I was still one of the actors involved in the execution of the child. All right, next up. Partner's relationship. Okay, we've got husband, 10% pre-law, 9% post-law. Okay, the vast majority of women who are getting abortions are unmarried. We see that in the CDC data as well. Next up, we've got dominant decision maker. This is extremely important because if women are being coerced, we would not expect them to self-report being the dominant decision maker. Though, of course, we should recognize that there could be exceptions where a woman does identify herself as the dominant decision maker despite being coerced. Could that happen? Certainly that could happen. Do I believe that that's happening at large and at scale? No. I think that, quite frankly, that would be a little bit conspiracy theorist to believe that these women are consistently reporting themselves as the dominant decision maker and that they're getting abortions for reasons that are independent of other people's desires. I think that it is really conspiratorial to believe that women are just lying on all these different surveys. And so I think if we're looking at the evidence objectively, women are telling us in this study that they are the dominant decision maker in 91% pre-law, 93% post-law. We see that in the Guttmacher study from 2004 and from 1987, less than 1.5% of women in 1987 survey said that partner, husband, or parents wanting them to have an abortion was their most important reason. Less than 1% on that survey in 2004. And so it would be, in my opinion, very conspiratorial to think that all these women are just lying on all these surveys, especially when in the streets they're telling us that they are pro-choice and that they are choosing to do this. So that would be my case here. Now, as far as the other parties, we got parent, guardian, 1.2% post-law, husband, fiance, boyfriend, 0.7% post-law, shared between self and another 2.2% post-law. Now, there is more information in this table I'm going to go to, but I do want to quickly reference 2 other studies that deal with the role that other parties play in women's decision-making process in abortion. So this one over here, it's titled Perceptions of Male Knowledge and Support Among U.S. Women Obtaining Abortions. All right, let's go through the methods and the main findings in the conclusion. Methods. We use data from a nationally representative sample of 9,493 women obtaining abortions to examine perceptions of male knowledge and support for the abortion according to 3 relationship characteristics: union status, length of relationship, and exposure to intimate partner violence, which they're going to label as IPV. Main findings. The overwhelming majority of women reported that the men with whom they got pregnant knew about the abortion, and most perceived these men to be supportive. Cohabitating, and to a lesser extent, married women, as well as those in longer relationships, were more likely to report both of these outcomes, even after controlling for demographic characteristics. Exposure to intimate partner violence by the man involved in the pregnancy, reported by 7% of abortion patients, substantially reduced the likelihood that women perceived the men to know about or be supportive of the abortion. Okay, now keep in mind that's very interesting. Okay, exposure to intimate partner violence by the man involved in the pregnancy, reported by 7% of abortion patients, substantially reduced the likelihood that women perceive the men to know about or be supportive of the abortion. Okay, I think that some people who believe that most women are coerced would actually have expected the opposite relationship there. But we don't want to base things on expectations or prejudgments. We want to evaluate the evidence objectively. All right, conclusion. Our results suggest that most women obtaining abortions are able to rely on male partners for social support, education, and counseling efforts that incorporate or reach out to male partners. May increase support for women obtaining abortions. However, this strategy may not be appropriate for all women, especially those exposed to intimate partner violence. One other note here that's worth mentioning. If an equal protection bill did pass, it wouldn't mean that a woman would be prosecuted for the murder of her child if she was legitimately coerced by a boyfriend. So the interesting thing here is if we pass an equal protection bill, it actually makes the penalties for abortion coercion significantly greater. Okay, so just a quick note on this. I asked Perplexity AI, what is the maximum penalty for abortion coercion in Wisconsin? So the maximum penalty for abortion coercion in Wisconsin depends on specific circumstances outlined in state law. Currently, non-consensual abortion, feticide, is classified as a Class H felony, punishable by up to 6 years in prison and or a $10,000 fine. However, if the act involves a viable fetus, 20 weeks plus for post-fertilization, or results in the mother's death, the offense escalates to a Class E felony, carrying up to 15 years imprisonment and a $50,000 fine. Now, consider this. If an equal protection bill passed, well, suddenly preborn human beings have the same value and are equally protected as born human beings. So then I asked, what is the maximum penalty for coercing someone to commit murder on a toddler in Wisconsin? And then it says, in Wisconsin, coercing someone to commit murder on a toddler would likely involve multiple charges, with penalties depending on the specific circumstances and charges applied. Based on the search results, first-degree intentional homicide applied to the perpetrator carries a mandatory life imprisonment sentence if the child's death results from the coercion. For the coerce, our charges could include solicitation of first-degree intentional homicide. While not explicitly detailed in the search results, Wisconsin law typically treats solicitation as a Class B felony, same as the completed crime, punishable by up to 60 years imprisonment. Okay, ultimately, if you do pass an equal protection bill, women would be increasingly protected from coercion because the penalties for abortion coercion suddenly increase all the way up to a first-degree murder charge. Because if a boyfriend violently forces his girlfriend to take mifepristone and misoprostol, which again are used in 63% of abortions, you can get them mailed to your doorstep. You don't even got to go to a clinic. Well, now the penalty for him doing that significantly greater than a $10,000 fine. He's actually facing first-degree homicide. So if we really do want to protect women from being coerced, an equal protection bill really would be the best way to do it. There's really no question about that. All right, the next study I wanted to touch on that relates to pressure in the abortion process is titled "The Role of Parents and Partners in Minors' Decision to Have an Abortion and Anticipated Coping After Abortion." Okay, the methods tell us we analyze data from medical charts and counseling needs assessments forms for 5,109 women accessing abortion services at a clinic in 2008, 9% of whom were minors aged 17 years and under. So this sample size 476. We examined differences in abortion characteristics, including parental and partner involvement between minors and adults, and used multivariate logistic regression models to examine predictors of parental involvement and support confidence in the decision and anticipated poor coping among minors. Results. Most minors reported that their mothers, 64%, and partners, 83%, were aware of their abortion. Younger age was associated with increased odds of maternal awareness and reduced odds of partner awareness. Compared with adults, minors were more likely to report external pressure to seek abortion, 10% versus 3%. Okay, so still we're looking at majority of them then are not reporting external pressure to seek abortion. And mothers were the most common source of pressure. Minors overall had high confidence in their decision and anticipated feeling a range of emotions post-abortion. Minors who felt pressure to seek abortion were less likely to report having confidence in their decision and more likely to report anticipating poor coping. Okay, and just one other thing here. Again, if you want to protect even minors from coercion, well, you would want to increase the penalties for coercion, which would be accomplished by an equal protection law. And also, just like if a minor, like for example, a 16 or a 17-year-old, was to go and commit an act of homicide, we have differing laws right now between the punishment for children and adults. Well, those differing laws regarding the punishment of children and adults would apply the same way if a bill of equal protection were to pass as well. All right, conclusions. Most minors involve parents and partners in their decision-making regarding abortion and find support from these individuals. For a minority, experiencing pressure or lack of support reduces confidence in their decision and increases their likelihood of anticipating poor coping after an abortion. Okay, one last note on equal protection bills here. If we are very much concerned about minors being sexually exploited, which we should be extremely concerned about minors being sexually exploited. Well, an equal protection bill would make it so that someone who is sexually abusing a minor and gets them pregnant and then forces them to get abortions to cover up the sexual abuse, that person, once again, the penalty would be much higher because now, not only if he's caught is he guilty of sexual abuse, but now he would also be on the hook for murder charges in the first degree because he's now actually murdered innocent children in the womb. Now, that victim of sexual abuse wouldn't be liable for anything. She's an actual victim. She's a legitimate victim in this situation, wouldn't be charged with anything because she was forced to take these pills against her knowledge or against her will. Now, that man would then be on the hook for, in the case of, him forcing her to have an abortion one time, at least one charge of first-degree murder. But if he's done it multiple times, then he could have as many as, 5, 6, 7 charges of first-degree murder against him. And so if we do really want to protect minors from sexual abuse, which we should, an equal protection bill would help with that as well. All right, that said, I do want to jump over to the study that we were just looking at. So I'm going to go back to that. All right, so dominant decision maker, we just covered that. Next thing we've got decision certainty at ultrasound visit. So you can remember the first study that I mentioned where we talked about decision certainty for women who are getting abortions. And it found that 7.4% of women were at a low or medium decision certainty regarding their abortion. Okay, this one is similar. It's showing that 93% of women pre-law and 93% of women post-law are at a firm decision certainty at their ultrasound visit. Keep in mind that the ultrasound visit and the visit for the abortion are two separate visits because Wisconsin has that 24-hour mandatory waiting period. Okay, 2.8% in the post-law period said they were uncertain, 3.1% in the pre-law, and then not in chart was 3%, and then 4% post-law. All right, viewed any ultrasound. Okay, this is where we saw that massive jump of about 30% spike in viewing any ultrasound, which we can praise God for because we do see that 2.5% increase in women who are choosing to continue the pregnancy. So it very likely did probably save some lives, which again helps to answer question number 2, which was, do pro-life laws, which restrict abortion but do not abolish it, accomplish some good despite falling short of equal protection? And the answer is they absolutely accomplish some good. Okay. Now, let's see what else I've got highlighted because there was some more things I wanted to go over from this study. All right, so right here, recalling that the law required the image to be displayed, but the woman could turn her head away or close her eyes, the effect of the law was no longer significant when viewing the ultrasound image was added to the model, suggesting mediation. Viewing was associated with a higher odds of continuing their pregnancy with an adjusted odds ratio of 1.86. Or in other words, viewing any ultrasound increased a woman's odds of continuing her pregnancy by 86%, okay, versus, aborting. So 86% improvement in the chances that she continues the pregnancy instead of getting the abortion when she looks at any ultrasound. So again, evidence that these pro-life laws do make a difference, especially considering obviously we saw that massive jump in women who are viewing the ultrasounds when this law went into effect in 2013. The effect of viewing was attenuated after adding decision certainty to the model. Being uncertain about the abortion decision was associated with an 8-fold increase in the odds of continuing pregnancy, making it the strongest factor associated with continuing pregnancy. All right, so basically, if women are coming in and they're uncertain or they're at a low or medium decision certainty, then that's a good thing versus them being at a firm decision certainty or at a high decision certainty, because they're far more likely to be willing to continue their pregnancy or to actually go and continue their pregnancy. So anything that we can do to decrease the amount of decision certainty that these women have when they enter into the abortion clinics would be a fantastic thing. So again, that would be a case for passing pro-life laws. All right, an interaction term between decision certainty and the law on the outcome of continuing pregnancy was not significant, suggesting that the law had a statistically significant effect among both firm and uncertain women. So this would actually differ from that previous study that I had mentioned that found that women with high decision certainty were not statistically significantly impacted by viewing their ultrasound. Okay, in this one, we did see that the women who were among both firm and uncertain women in their decision certainty were statistically significantly impacted by viewing their ultrasound. So that is a difference between this study and the previous one. One thing that is worth noting, however, is that the sample size of uncertain women was much, much smaller in this study in particular compared to the last one. So it could be that since that last one had a much larger sample size of women who are at low or medium decision certainty versus this one, it's possible that that other one that we had shown previously might actually be better representative of the general population or possibly just more accurate. So that is one thing worth noting. One other thing I want to touch on here is what I don't want people to do is take the information that I'm presenting where I talk about how in the majority of cases, even the women who view an ultrasound proceed to get the abortion. I don't want people to take that and say, okay, well then we don't need to fund crisis pregnancy centers. That would be an incorrect conclusion. Rather, what the data is telling us is that the ultrasounds do make a difference for some women. While they don't make a difference for the majority of women will see the ultrasound and still go through to murder the child by abortion, they do make a difference for some. right? And so we should actually still try to fund these crisis pregnancy centers, especially considering that the women who will be going to these crisis pregnancy centers are the women who aren't at a high decision certainty for the most part. Okay, the women who are most likely to go to the crisis pregnancy centers are going to be the ones who are at a low decision certainty, not at a high or a firm decision certainty. And so those women who are going to the crisis pregnancy centers, when they then get those ultrasounds, they are more likely to change their mind than a woman who's at a high or firm decision certainty who's going to an urban abortion clinic. Okay, so I'm not arguing by any means for defunding crisis pregnancy centers or saying that crisis pregnancy centers don't do anything. I'm arguing the opposite. So I did just want to clarify that because I thought that some people might misinterpret what I'm saying, and I don't want them to do that. Okay, clearly we should be funding the crisis pregnancy centers and trying to fund the ultrasounds and making more women partake in the ultrasounds, even at the abortion clinics that aren't crisis pregnancy centers, because if they do see the ultrasound, it does make a difference for some of the women. It doesn't make a difference for the majority, but it does make a difference for some, and every human life matters. All right. Women whose partners were the dominant decision makers were also more likely to continue their pregnancies than those who identify themselves as the dominant decision makers, which I will point out again is probably contrary to what a lot of pro-life people would expect. Okay, so I'm going to read it one more time. Women whose partners were the dominant decision makers were also more likely to continue their pregnancies than those who identified themselves as the dominant decision makers. Okay, so that's contrary to probably what a lot of people would anticipate. So I thought that was interesting. All right, next up, women who were required to pay fully out of pocket were more likely to continue the pregnancy than those who qualified for partial assistance from an abortion fund. Adjusted odd ratio is a 4.98. Okay, so women who were required to pay fully out of pocket were about 5 times more likely to continue their pregnancy than those who qualified for partial assistance from an abortion fund. So again, if we can pass laws that cut down on funding for abortions, that's a good thing. It very likely would save some lives. So that's something that we can pursue and that we ought to pursue. A further analysis of funding revealed that women who qualified for abortion funds were significantly more likely to be firm in their decision. Keep in mind, if someone's firm in their decision, they're less likely to be swayed by the ultrasound, and they are less likely to change their mind. Okay, women who are uncertain are much, much more likely to ultimately continue the pregnancy. Okay, this study said that it was 8 times more likely for a woman who is at uncertain in her decision rather than firm in her decision certainty to ultimately continue the pregnancy. Okay, so if providing funding for the abortion is increasing women's decision certainty, well, then we should try to cut funding for abortion if we want more women to choose to continue the pregnancy. Okay, it says 98% of women who qualified for abortion funds were firm compared to 94% of women who did not. All right, we wish to explore whether decision certainty moderated the relationship between the law and continuing pregnancy, but due to small numbers of women who were uncertain, we were unable to formally do so. We were, however, able to examine continuing pregnancy rates stratified by decision certainty. While the vast majority of women reported firm decision certainty and more than 90% of these women proceeded to abortion, there was a statistically significant increase in continuing pregnancy rates among women who were firm before and after the law, 7.1% pre-law, 9.6% post-law, p equaling 0.002. All right. Now, again, going back to that first question for a second here. All right. We do see that the majority of women, both pre and post law, are still choosing to abort their children at this Milwaukee clinic, even after all of this informed consent, including that mandatory ultrasound, which 91% of women are viewing. Okay, so I'm still going to try to keep answering question 1 and question 2 as we go through this. Among the small proportion of women expressing uncertainty about their decision to have an abortion or who had missing data on decision certainty, 4.5% of women eligible for abortion, N equals 232, 43% of those pre-law and 44% of those post-law continue their pregnancy, a difference that was not statistically significant. All right. I think we got a little bit left here. Broadly speaking, the sample was similar to the overall population that sought abortion care from the facility in the post-law period. The exception to the similarity was in the relative overparticipation of white women and underparticipation of Black and particularly Latino women. The majority of respondents, N equals 19. Okay, now we're shifting into the interviews. Okay, so they did do phone interviews with some questions. And that's what we're getting into now rather than that like 2,000 sample size pre-law, 2,000 sample size post-law. Okay, so now we're talking about something else where they actually did these interviews. So broadly speaking, let's see, the majority of respondents, N equals 19, there were 23 total, by the way, reported viewing their ultrasound image during their appointment at the abortion clinic. As the law mandates the visual display of the ultrasound image as well as a verbal description of the content of the image. The 4 women who declined to view did nonetheless hear a description of their ultrasound image, which again, Another great thing from this pro-life law, okay, that verbal description. So not just showing the ultrasound, which women could close their eyes or look away, but a literal verbal description of the child's body parts. So that's a great thing, and the heartbeat. Okay, most of the respondents, 18, were not aware of the law requiring that they be presented with their ultrasound image and listen to a description of the image. 3 reported that they had a vague idea about the law prior to their appointment. One patient, for example, said she might have read about it. Just 2 respondents said that they knew about the law in advance of their first appointment, and both women explained that they learned of it in the course of doing research to prepare themselves for their abortion appointments. Both women viewed their ultrasound images. Both women viewed their ultrasound image, because keep in mind that they could either view the image that they were given after the ultrasound, or they could view it when they put it in the line of sight of them. Okay, now one thing that's important to note here is that even though it says that most of the women weren't aware of the law prior to arriving at the clinic, it is possible that some women could have either chosen to not get an abortion, not enter the clinic in the first place, or travel out of state if they did research online and realized that they would have had to have seen the abortion, have gone through that informed consent process, get the verbal description of the heartbeat and body parts. So that's something that this study obviously wouldn't cover, because these women wouldn't end up actually arriving at the clinic for that first appointment. Okay, so that's another positive impact that these pro-life laws can have. All right, let me see where I left off. Right here. So because of respondents' general lack of knowledge about the law itself, and in light of the quantitative finding that viewing the ultrasound image mediated the association between the law and continuing a pregnancy, we focus our analysis below on how respondents described the effects of ultrasound viewing, with attention to how that experience fit into the broader context of their lives and decision-making. Effects of ultrasound viewing: all 4 of the respondents who declined to view their ultrasound image proceeded to abortion, and for the most part, those who did view their ultrasound image did not talk about viewing as having an impact on their decision to have an abortion. For example, one woman who viewed her ultrasound image because she thought it was interesting to see reported that viewing had no impact on her decision to have an abortion. Quote, "Didn't change my mind at all, or my feelings, or anything like that." Another who explained she chose to view in order to inform her decision-making process was similarly unaffected by viewing, stating it had overall no effect. "I could probably have gone away without seeing or not seeing it. I don't think it affected anything." Instead, respondents identified other factors as having a larger impact on their decision to have an abortion, such as the difficulty of securing funds to cover the cost of the abortion. Respondents who went to great lengths to overcome these factors, like for example the respondents who spent 2 days calling an abortion fund seeking financial aid before getting through and receiving support, were particularly unaffected by viewing. Across the respondents, as these examples demonstrate, the most common reported reaction to viewing was a neutral one. For most women, viewing had no emotional effect or impact on their decision to have an abortion. So again, when we're talking about the majority, for most women, viewing had no emotional effect or impact on their decision to have an abortion. Obviously, in this case here, we're not talking about that sample size of over 2,000 on pre-law and over 2,000 post-law. We're talking about instead about the 23 that were phone interviewed. All right. 8 respondents, however, did report that viewing had an effect on them. Perhaps unexpectedly, for 5 of those 8, viewing solidified their decision to have an abortion. Okay, 5 out of the 8, viewing solidified their decision to have an abortion. So far, not looking like the majority of them are then going on to continue the pregnancy when they see the ultrasound, which is obviously what the data has shown us, both in this Wisconsin survey, both in the Wisconsin data. This one is not actually a survey. Okay, this one is actually tracking through the cases. Both in this study and the studies that we've seen previously, the vast majority of the women who are seeing the ultrasounds are still proceeding with the abortion. All right. So we've got, for 5 of these 8, viewing solidified their decision to have an abortion. One explained, "I said, yeah, I want to see it. And then I looked at it and it's just a sac. That's it. There it is right here. And then, yeah, that was it. That's how I knew I was ready to have the abortion. And I realized when I saw it, I wasn't emotionally connected to that as a child yet. So I was able to know from that point, when I looked at the ultrasound, I didn't feel bad. I was like, that's, people. I was okay with it. So I do think that was a positive experience, that I was well enough to look at it and say, yeah, I want to see it. And yeah, I'm not having it." So I would say that doesn't particularly sound like a victim to me. Just saying, doesn't particularly sound like a victim to me. But later in the interview, she summed up the effect of viewing, saying, "I just feel like looking helped me kind of accept, be certain about choosing abortion." For another woman who reported choosing to view in order to confirm her decision to have an abortion, viewing did stir up some negative emotions. It reminded her of viewing the ultrasounds for her 2 existing children, which is why I mentioned the CDC data that tells us that 59% of women have already given birth at least once and 35% have already given birth at least twice. Nonetheless, she said that experiencing those feelings did not make her waver on her decision to have an abortion. All right, so see, even her feelings of reminding her of viewing the ultrasounds of her 2 existing children didn't make her waver on her decision to have an abortion. Again, doesn't sound like a victim to me. She explained, regardless of what I've seen, how I feel, even if I was to feel like I should keep it, at the end of the day, my mindset that I shouldn't keep it because I'm not ready. Okay, what is her decision? Because I'm not ready. Okay, remember that 2004 Guttmacher survey where I believe the top answer was that timing is wrong, which I think was 23%, I want to say, of women saying that that was their primary reason for having the abortion. Timing is wrong. Again, here, because I'm not ready. Okay, so that would be something that is a selfish decision, not something that is, someone being a victim. All right, 2 of these respondents who described viewing their pre-abortion ultrasound images as having an emotional effect on them, however, said viewing contributed to their decision to continue the pregnancy. Okay, so 2 out of 23 described viewing the pre-abortion ultrasound as having an emotional impact on them, however, said viewing contributed to their decision to continue the pregnancy. So 2 out of 23. Now, remember question number 2. Do pro-life laws do some good even though they fall short of equal protection? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so we're getting pretty clear answers to question 1 and 2 if you can't tell already. One respondent, for example, who was 10 weeks pregnant, showed up for her abortion appointment, which per Wisconsin law is at least 24 hours after her first appointment at the clinic, but left without obtaining the procedure, having decided to continue the pregnancy. She attributed some of her decision to continue the pregnancy to viewing her pre-abortion ultrasound scan at the abortion facility, as well as viewing ultrasound images she received at a nearby hospital prior to her appointment at the abortion facility. Okay, so again, I'm going to mention this about the crisis pregnancy centers. Okay, it's possible someone could view their ultrasound images at a crisis pregnancy center, then go to an abortion clinic, and then make a decision like this woman did to continue her pregnancy. Okay, she said, maybe looking at all the ultrasounds made me change my mind. Deeper considerations of her experience, however, points to ongoing ambivalence about choosing abortion. She explained that at the time of her first appointment, i.e. the ultrasound appointment, she was, quote, not at all sure abortion was the right decision for her. She elaborated. Basically, just listening to other people it kind of brought me there to even consider the abortion. It was never a thought of my own. So, and I finally listened to myself. I felt like abortion wasn't for me. And I knew I wasn't going to be happy with the decision. She continued, explaining that abortion was her boyfriend's preference. He didn't want another child, didn't want anything to do with raising another child. So it was just basically his idea, a lot of it. Kind of felt like I didn't really have a choice. And it was more of a thing that I would have been forced to do. At the same time, actually, I'm going to pause there for a second. All right, so one thing worth noting here. Obviously, we don't have all the details of this situation and what exactly she means when she says, and it was more of a thing that I would have been forced to do. There, we don't know if she means like genuine legal coercion from the legal definition where someone is actually being forced to do something against their will at like a threat of violence, or if she just means that it would have been tough circumstantially. Okay, those are 2 very, very different things because, for example, you could have a situation, I'm just going to use a situation separate from this. Okay, you could have a situation where a woman has, a 2-year-old child and the boyfriend's like, hey, I'm really sick of paying child support. Why don't we like fake a drowning of this child like in the pool or something, right? And then obviously if the mother was to go through that and she wasn't being forced at like threat of gun or violence or something to do that, the boyfriend just kind of suggested it and she went along with it and she actually like tossed the child in the pool. Okay, she would obviously be guilty of homicide. Okay, whether you want to call it murder, manslaughter, whatever, judges can figure that out, courts can figure that out. Okay, but if she wasn't actually forced to do it, boyfriend's not pointing a gun at her, or saying that she needs to do it at threat of violence, just kind of an idea that he tossed out. She kind of like agreed with it. They kind of like both shared that same idea. Obviously, in that case, that wouldn't qualify under the legal definition of coercion, right? She wouldn't be exempted from punishment for tossing her toddler into the pool where the toddler drowned and died. Okay, she wouldn't be exempted in that situation. However, if it was a situation where the boyfriend is saying, he's got like a knife or a gun and he's about to, kill her and the child unless she like tosses the child in the pool, or even if he just say like that he's going to kill her, not the child, if she doesn't toss the child in the pool, right? And the toddler drowns. Obviously, in that case, the principal actor would be the boyfriend, and the boyfriend would be charged. So with the bills of equal protection, again, keep in mind that all they're going to seek to do is provide the same protection to the preborn that the born people already have. And all the laws regarding coercion, pressure, all that kind of stuff, it's just going to apply the same way. So it's not as though if a woman is genuinely coerced under the legal definition, she would be held responsible. No, whoever's doing the coercing would be responsible. All right, back to this. At the same time, her mother disapproved of her plan to have an abortion and offered to adopt the baby after it was born, allowing the respondent to have a role in the baby's life. She explained that viewing the ultrasounds made her ask herself, why do I have to abort my child when I know I have the option to keep it? And keep in mind there, why did I have to abort my child? She knows it's her child. Okay, these thoughts, however, were not brought on by viewing the ultrasound image. She said, I was kind of already having those thoughts. Abortion, was just something I was never comfortable with. She had not, however, articulated this hesitation to a member of the clinic staff. When they asked her if she wanted an abortion, she said she did and that it was her decision. So this is what I mentioned earlier about how it is possible that some of the women who are saying that they affirm their decision and that they are themselves the dominant decision maker, it's possible that those numbers could be off slightly, because you could have women who are just saying that they're the dominant decision maker to try to expedite their process at the abortion facility, not get asked a bunch of questions, things like that. So I'm willing to acknowledge it's possible these numbers could be slightly off. However, I don't think it is the case that the majority of women are not the dominant decision maker. Rather, I think that you could make an argument that maybe these numbers are 5% off, and that instead of it being 93% of women that are actually the dominant decision maker, maybe it's 88%. But I certainly think it would be conspiratorial and not looking at the evidence objectively to say, no, it's actually like 40% of women are the dominant decision maker, and the other 60% is genuine coercion under the legal definition, like boyfriend threatening violence against the girlfriend. Okay, I think that's completely conspiratorial, and that is not looking at the data objectively. Okay, so I'm willing to grant that maybe you could argue for, instead of it being something like 93%, maybe it's like 88%. But, jumping from like 93% to like 40%, that's, in my opinion, just completely unobjective, conspiratorial, and not being fair to what we're actually seeing in the data. All right, let's go ahead and keep reading. Another respondent, already a mother of 5 children between 8 years and 5 months old, also attributed her decision to continue this pregnancy to viewing the ultrasound image. She described viewing her ultrasound image as a turning point in her pregnancy decision making. This respondent had not considered abortion with any of her previous pregnancies, even for a second, but this time was different because her youngest son was so young and her most recent pregnancy had been difficult with severe medical complications. She worried about her ability to have a safe pregnancy. Still, she was unsure about abortion. It was probably a back and forth for a long time, which was probably why there was such a huge gap of 7 weeks about when I found out about being pregnant and when I actually went to the clinic. It was a lot of back and forth. When asked how certain she was at the time of her first appointment that abortion was the right decision for her, she replied, I don't think I was at all. She did not, however, share this uncertainty with any clinic staff members, instead conveying to them that she was firm in her decision to have an abortion. Okay, looking at the ultrasound image of her 16-week pregnancy clarified her decision and resolved her uncertainty. One note here, 16 weeks would be really a rarity in regards to abortion. That's pretty late compared to what the typical abortions are done at gestation-wise. Typically, they're done much earlier than that. It made me feel like I finally knew a little bit of how I felt about the whole situation. Before, I was unsure if it's the right thing to do. And then when she was kicking her feet and the hand was going across the face. And all I could think was like, how do you do something like this? It's clearly alive. It's clearly moving around. Like, how? It's mine. That's my baby. When she spoke to the father of her child soon after, he agreed and they jointly decided to continue the pregnancy and raise the child. Okay, so question number 2. Do pro-life laws do some good, even though they fall short of equal protection? Yes. Should we pass them? Yes. Should we gain as much ground as fast as we can while, not committing like political suicide? Yes. Okay, so I'm arguing for smash mouth incrementalism all the way. Okay, but I'm not arguing for smash mouth incrementalism with the ultimate goal of still leaving abortion legal for mothers with special murder rights. Not arguing for that. I'm arguing for smash mouth incrementalism with the ultimate goal of equal protection with no special murder rights for anyone, including the mothers. Okay, so that is what I'm arguing for. All right, finally, one respondent reported that she experienced happiness at viewing the ultrasound image. Looking at the screen didn't hurt me, actually. It made me happy, at least for a brief moment. Unlike any of the other women interviewed, this respondent was sure that she did not want to have an abortion. In fact, she wanted desperately to keep the pregnancy, but found herself in a complex legal situation wherein having the baby would likely result in her boyfriend going to jail. At the time of the interview, she had not scheduled her abortion appointment, saying, I'm still holding out hope that I can continue this pregnancy. By her account, viewing did not affect her abortion decision. It did not add to or even impact her desire to continue the pregnancy. Just one thing here. Okay, so before I read the rest of this, I'm just going to speculate as to what could be the situations. Obviously, I don't know the situation specifically, but I can probably make a decent guess as to what it could be or what a situation like it could be. So in a situation where a woman is worried that the birth of her child would result in her boyfriend going to jail, I would assume that it would be a situation wherein somehow when the child is born, there's going to be traces of either abortion pills like mifepristone and misoprostol. I forget which one of the two you test in the child, or there is going to be something like a drug like some like hardcore drug that they'll see like like a crack baby or something like that. And the boyfriend will go to jail because of that. Maybe he was, cooking something up in the house, and because she was pregnant, it gets into her body or something like that. That's what I would speculate would be the situation. Now, before I read the rest of it, again, I want to address something on that. If you had a toddler, okay, and one thing here, I'm going to keep trotting out the toddler because it works. If you had a woman who had a toddler, right, and then she's like, well, if I don't take the life of my toddler, then my boyfriend is going to go to jail because he's been cooking up meth and people are going to find out. Okay. None of us would say, okay, well then if you murder the toddler, then you're not morally culpable for the sin of murder. No, you're still morally culpable for the sin of murder. Obviously. Okay. So just because your boyfriend's going to go to jail if you don't kill your child doesn't mean you go kill your kid. You're still morally culpable if you decide to kill your kid in that situation. You obviously shouldn't kill your kid in that situation. You should contact the authorities. And if your boyfriend really did something wrong, then he should go to jail. Anyways, I'll go ahead and read the rest of it now. Like the women who are certain that abortion was the right decision for them, this respondent experienced viewing as unrelated to her abortion decision-making. Indeed, looking offered her a memory she could think back on in the future if she proceeds with the abortion. She said, by looking, I, can still have that little part of me because for a few months' time, that was my baby. So hopefully she didn't go through with the abortion. Hopefully she kept what she literally called my baby, her baby. But I think that is the end of the highlighted sections that I want. Oh, no, it is not. I still have some more. Okay. Women reporting that their partners were the dominant decision makers in their relationships were more likely to continue their pregnancies, which demonstrates that men can have a strong influence on women's abortion decisions. Okay. Again, read that. Women reporting their partners were the dominant decision makers in their relationships were more likely to continue their pregnancies, which demonstrates that men can have a strong influence on women's abortion decisions. Which again, I think that's contrary to what pro-lifers would expect. 34 and 35 here, okay, those sources, I think I want to say those were the ones that I covered earlier. Maybe they aren't, but I don't think we need to go to them now. It says, well, the literature finds that most men are supportive of women's abortion decisions. It also finds that small proportion of men who are controlling or violent are less likely to support women's reproductive decisions. I think the ones that we covered are in there. They're either 34, 35, 36, or 37. The two that we covered there were two of those four. Next up, we've got, there are a few limitations. However, first, in addition to viewing, the law also required providers to describe fetal development to all patients in the post-law period, which may also have contributed to the effects seen among women in decisions containing their pregnancies, but this study is unable to tease apart such effects. Second, women who were eligible for an abortion but did not return for an abortion were assumed to have continued the pregnancy, although it is possible that some obtained an abortion at another facility. There is no reason to believe that there was an increase in the percentage of women who went elsewhere for an abortion after the law, as there were no new abortion services over the study period. Third, the interview data were collected exclusively in the post-law period, so we cannot know whether there are reports of any effects or lack thereof of viewing are specific to the mandatory viewing setting. All right, so I think I covered this pretty objectively. I think that is all of these studies that I'm going to be covering for today. And I think we did answer question 1 and question 2 as objectively as one possibly could. And so I don't think that there's really anything more that I can provide at this point that I've seen in terms of data, but I do think that the evidence is absolutely overwhelming on questions 1 and question number 2. So on question number 1, I think the evidence is absolutely overwhelming that in the vast majority of instances, a mother who gets an abortion is culpable in the murder of her preborn child. However, of course, there are exceptions to that. Of course, there are exceptions where a woman is genuinely coerced under threats of violence against her will. And in that situation, she is a genuine victim and she is not a murderer. And there is no sin to confess in that situation any more than there is, in a situation where someone is coerced into killing a born person against their will under threats of violence. Now, using the term victim on that portion, if someone wants to use the term victim to say that women are victims of the abortion industry because they don't think they're given informed consent regarding the physical and mental health risks of the abortion procedure, and they have evidence to support that, then I don't mind them using it in that context. What I do have a problem with, however, is exempting the majority of women who did willingly take the life of their preborn child and thus are a murderer and telling them that they are victims. And the reason I have a problem with that is because victims don't need to repent and confess sin to a God who is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins, but a murderer does need to repent and confess sins to a God who is faithful and just to forgive us our sins. And so that is the distinction that I want to make. Another thing I want to point out is that if people don't want to call women murderers because they think it's unhelpful to the pro-life movement, they can make that argument And obviously, I don't think that we should just go around willy-nilly calling, women who got abortions on the street. I don't think we should go willy-nilly murder, 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 murder. No, I'm not arguing for that. Okay, so if people want to say that we shouldn't call women murderers just all the time because it's unhelpful, I would largely agree. What I'm really arguing for, though, is stopping calling these women victims. That's what I really want us to stop doing. Because it has gospel implications. It has implications for whether or not someone needs to confess sin or if they are actually a victim. And I'd also point out, if we do view these women as victims in the majority of cases, well then, are they a victim when they get their second abortion? How about their third? How about their fourth? How about their fifth? When does it end? So I really don't think that we should be calling these women victims. That's really what I'm trying to, tell people that we need to stop doing. Whether or not you want to call them murderers and in what context, that's really for you to decide based on, what you think is best in specific scenarios. I've only been in the sort of pro-life movement for about 18 months. So there's probably people more qualified than me to make that call. But I think I am absolutely qualified to say that we should not be calling them victims because it is inaccurate, it is not true, and it is against what the Bible tells us. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's completely unscriptural to call these women victims when they're not. It denies them of the opportunity to repent and confess sin to a God who's faithful and just to forgive us our sins. All right, question number 2. We'll answer that and then we'll wrap this up. Do pro-life laws, which restrict abortion but do not abolish it and do not provide equal protection, do they still save some lives? The answer is overwhelmingly obvious that they absolutely do. So we should absolutely support as many restrictions on abortion, as many ways to defund pro-abortion organizations as we can, try to cut it down as often as we can, do the best that we can. I don't think that means we have to commit political suicide. So I do think it would be acceptable for lawmakers in pro-life states like Oklahoma and Louisiana to take national politics into account. So if I was, for example, a lawmaker in Oklahoma or Louisiana where there's a pro-life majority, and I'm considering passing an equal protection bill without exceptions for women, to have special murder rights, I think it would be acceptable to analyze what would be the implications in the next federal elections of me passing this bill. And if I do the math, and I'm not doing it out of political cowardice, but I'm just doing it as accurate as I can, as objective as I can, not because I'm afraid of pushback, but because I want to serve God as best I can and serve my constituents the best I can. And I look at the data and I think to myself, okay, if I pass this in 2 years or in 4 years, the Democrats are going to absolutely blow us out of the water. They're going to have super majorities. They're going to take over the House. They're going to take over the Senate. They're going to take over the presidency, and they're going to reinstore Roe v. Wade or straight abortion protections up to birth to the point where states can't do anything. Well, then, am I actually serving God and my constituents well by passing a bill that is only going to last for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then for the next 4 years, or the next 8 years, or the next 12 years, or the next 16 years, am I going to be stuck with not being able to do anything about abortion, not being able to restrict it at all? Because the Democrats are just going to smoke us for the next decade because, unfortunately, most Americans are okay with the mothers of preborn children murdering their preborn children. I think it's okay to make a political calculation. What I'm arguing against is distorting what Scripture teaches about who is a victim and who is not, and how we approach and talk about sin. That is what I'm disputing. That is why I made this video, because I have serious objections to calling murderers victims, because that has implications on the gospel and how we understand our relation and our sin before God. So that is why I was motivated to make this video. I did have a conversation with Charlie Kirk yesterday on the topic. Today is April 12th as I'm filming this video. I hope that Charlie gets a chance to see this, though I admit that it is quite unlikely given it is a long video. He is a very busy man. But if he does view it, I think he will recognize that I am being objective in this. I am giving both sides the abolitionist rhetoric and the pro-life rhetoric. I'm giving both of them, critiques, okay? On the pro-life direction, I'm giving a critique in relation to question 1, and the abolitionist rhetoric, I'm giving a critique in relation to question 2. I'm being as objective as I can. I think I'm being completely fair. I looked at a lot of evidence here, and so hopefully he sees this and maybe he can, at least consider what I had to say, because I do think I am being fair in how I'm looking at the data and the information, and I'm trying to use logic and reason in interpreting it. So have a great day. If you appreciated this video, there will probably be links in the description for ways that you can support me, and I would very, very much appreciate that. And have a great day.